Female authors. Hello and welcome to a channel that used to be called Bookshevelico and now it's going to be What's Sophie Reading. We all like changes, right? Yeah, no, we've completely rebranded. Welcome to What's Sophie's Reading, and I'm Sophie and I'm gonna be talking to you about books because that's what Book Talk is about. Come on, Betty. There. Today's topic is female authors for the Women in Translation Month. I'll be recommending to you 4 different authors that I think you should definitely get to know. If you haven't heard of the Women in Translation Month yet, it is a month purely dedicated to women that do not write in English. I think there's something about 33% of all the books that are being translated into English are women. So there's a whole month dedicated to reading only women. And I have 4 different ladies for you that I genuinely think you should get to know. They are not all Japanese, don't worry about that. They're from 4 different countries and they write completely different books. So grab your tea and grab your cat and let's dive in. The first author on the list that I think you should definitely read is none other than Mieko Kawakami. Mieko Kawakami is a Japanese author who got really famous after this book got translated, Breast and Eggs, which I haven't read yet. She's definitely like a feminist author in Japan and she's really well liked, including by Haruki Murakami, which is quite an interesting thing. The 4 books that I do have are Miss Ice Sandwich, Heaven, All the Lovers in a Night, and Breast and Eggs. Now I have read these 2 and I have not read these 2. Miss Ice Sandwich, very short, tiny little book. It has 92 pages. Very small book about a boy who's growing up and he's got a crush. The lady works at a supermarket shop, she sells sandwiches, but she's got these incredible blue eyes that our main character, whenever he sees them, he thinks of ice. It is a very charming little story. Written from the perspective of the boy. It feels like she's got a talent for writing books from the perspective of teenagers and children, and she makes it real, she makes it raw. It kind of makes you go back to the time when you were a teenager yourself. You can read it in one sitting if you'd like. The next book is Heaven. This is the first book that I read by Mieko Kawakami, and this is definitely a book that you need to look up trigger warnings for before you dive into it. It has extreme violence. The themes of bullying are quite prominent in this book and it's really hard to read. It makes you really angry as a reader. The general story of the book is a 14-year-old boy goes to school and he is being bullied. He meets Kojima. Kojima is a female classmate of his. They're trying to get through the bullying together. They're saying, you know, that they're not going to be broken by the bullying, so they don't tell anybody about it. They don't really do anything about it. They just let the bullying continue. It is really hard but incredibly written, and if you can, I highly recommend getting through this one. The other 2, I cannot tell you much about them because I haven't read them. All the Lovers in a Night is a story about a 35-year-old proofreader who struggles with relationships until she meets one mysterious man. Breast and Eggs is a feminist story where we meet 3 women who talk about their anxieties and the struggles they have to go through in the Japanese society. And I'm hoping to read this one this year. Tea time. Okay, let's move on to our Nobel Prize winner in literature. This woman is from Poland and her name is Olga Tokarczuk, and she wrote quite a few hefty books. For this one, I do not own an English copy. This is the original, and I love them. Olga Tokarczuk won the Nobel Prize in Literature, I believe in 2018. She's a really good author and I love her books. She's a bit controversial figure in Poland, but her books are still incredible. First one that I would highly recommend is Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. Very quirky, very light-hearted novel about a woman who lives out in the Polish mountains. And she's a bit eccentric. So what happens in a village is two dogs of the main character, Janina Duszejko, they disappear. At the same time, some kind of murder is happening around, and she's taking us through the events and how they unfold as she's trying to figure out who was the murderer of the people and the dogs. It's a good book. Really good book. I genuinely think you should give it a go. Even my husband loved it. The one that I am going to be reading for this year's Women in Translation Month, the Doorstopper, the Brick, the Books of Jacob, 900 pages of pain. A book set in mid-18th century in Poland. It involves a mysterious Jew that arrives out of nowhere. And suddenly he changes his persona and his name. There's not much else I can tell you about the book other than it sounds extremely fascinating. The last book by Olga Tokarczuk that like I said, I do not have in English, but she has won the International Booker Prize 2018 for that, is Flight. Flight is a weird one because it doesn't have a story. It just has short stories, sometimes only one sentence. It's a very specific book that I wasn't a massive fan of myself, but I've heard, I mean, it won awards, surely it's worth reading. There's so many other books by Olga Tokarczuk that are worth getting to know, but I think these are the only three that are translated at the moment, so we're just gonna move on to the next one. Tove Ditlevsen. I'm so sorry to any Danish person around here. Yet again, I do not own the book that I really want to talk about. I haven't actually read this one. That was gifted to me by my very good friend. But the book that I want to talk about is the Copenhagen Trilogy. Quickly going back to the author herself, Tove Ditlevsen. She was an incredible poet and writer in the previous century. She was extremely overlooked, but the Copenhagen Trilogy got translated into English and that made her a lot more famous abroad. The Copenhagen Trilogy is divided into three parts: their childhood, youth and dependency, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. It's actually incredible the way the book was written because it hasn't been released as a trilogy. They were released as just one book at a time and people had to wait for years for the next book to come out, so they kind of grew up with the main character as well. We've got the childhood bit, talks about the childhood of our main protagonist. She grew up in a industrial area in Copenhagen, and she talks about the struggles of growing up. She then moves on to the youth, where she goes on about men and marriages, sexuality of women, and then she moves on to the third book, which is Dependency, which is where the struggle with drugs kicks in. The book is partly autobiographical. She would quite often include her own personal experiences into the fiction books. I remember when I was reading that book and I think I finished it in like a couple of days. It was so good. Tea time, and we're moving on to the last lady. The very last author that I want to talk to you about is Mariana Enriquez, and she is Argentinian. Yeah, Mariana Enriquez is an Argentinian author. She has written one full-length novel that was translated into English and I think another set of short stories. I only have this one. I remember when it first came out and my first thought was, this is brave. This particular book is essentially a collection of short stories. They are pretty gothic, are a little bit disturbing. It reads like a horror book, but it's really good. I first read it I think 2 years ago and it hasn't really left my mind yet. The short stories, the one that I remember vividly still is A Man Obsessed with Hearts. Just so you have the idea, a dude completely obsessed with human hearts. Hello. These are my recommendations for this year's Women in Translation Month. Do let me know whether you found it helpful at all. If you know any of these authors, whether you plan on reading any of these authors. They are incredible, you really should. I hope you are gonna reach for at least one of them, and I hope you're gonna love it. Okay, this is getting quite long, so I will be going, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!